Hey everyone, and welcome to Season 3, Episode 63 of Bad Voltage. Now, this is going to be a little bit of an interesting one because there's only two of us. There's Mr. Stuart Ian Langridge, who is on the other side of the virtual divide here. How you doing, Mr. Langridge?
The virtual divide. That sounds rather terrible.
I don't know where that came from. I just got back from a conference. That's where that came from. I was leveraging hyperscale credibility.
I don't doubt it. I really don't. But yes, Jeremy can't make it for this episode, so we're gonna record the two of us. But no worries.
Yes,
and
yeah,
it's interesting. There's simultaneously a lot of news, but there's not really anything which fires me up. All the news is kind of, well, that's a bit sad. But there are a couple of things which you managed to come up with.
Yeah.
So
yeah, we got some interesting stuff.
So
what do you want to start with?
Why don't you get us started? Because I want to hear about how apparently we get to fly into the center of New York now.
Should we start with that? Because that's an interesting one. So starting with some properly space age shit. So Governor Eric Adams has said that within our lifetime, many of you are going to be your own personal. Many of you are going to own your own personal electric helicopter. Eric Adams seems to think that everybody's lifetime is going to end 2 years from now, because it's he thinks everything's going to be everyone's going to be flying around in helicopters by 2025. But basically, there's a transportation startup called, hilariously titled, Jobby Aviation.
I know.
Maybe it's.
I'm assuming it's Joby rather than Jobby, but yeah. A quick tip for them: if they take off and they decide to go out there into the world and be called Jobby Aviation, don't open a branch in Glasgow.
So, for those of you who are a bit confused about what we're talking about, a lot of Scottish people will refer to a jobby as a poo. Anyway, so they did a demo flight of this 6-prop electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft, and it was part of a press conference that was being held by Mayor Adams. And he basically has said, you know, we want to have people flying around in these things by 2025. Now, the reason why I added this as a news item is that if it was, you know, a lot of, like, I think it's California say, whoa, we should be completely electric cars. We have full electric cars being driven in the state by 2030. 2030 is a way off, right? But 2025 is the year after next. And we're pretty much at the end of this year. So this is a pretty.
I want to be clear. 2030 is a way off if you've got to wait till then for your package to be delivered. It's not a way off if you've got to build a utterly unprecedented electric heliport in the middle of the busiest city on Earth, right?
Yeah. Now, I know in New Yorkers like to talk about this thing called Blade, which is like Uber for helicopters. So people are flying around New York in helicopters, and people will take like private plane, like rich people will take private planes and whatever else. That's nothing new, but a privately driven autonomous air taxi is a whole new level. So, do you think this is going to happen?
And so, I'm going to read you a thing, right?
All right.
It's designed by architect Charles W. Glover, right? And model was presented at the Institute of Civil Engineers in June. It was envisioned that the aircraft will approach down what they call a new aerial way above the Pentonville Road, and landing on one of the runways, which look almost like spokes on a cartwheel. Right, it will see both regular and private flights. Businessmen owning their own small aircraft will be able to store them in garages under the landing area runways, which will be brought up by lifts when they're going to be flown, and passengers taken up to the craft in much the same way via lifts from the buildings below, which make up the rest of the urban airfield. Right? Does that all sound convincing? Right. That's from an article in the Illustrated London News in 1931 about how they were going to build this massive, great big wheel of runways on top of King's Cross Station in London. Right? And all the stuff they were sat, and there's a picture of it here. It's brilliant. It's basically a huge, great big cartwheel sized circular runway with spokes. Right? balanced on top of King's Cross Station, which for those people who have not been to London is London's main station. It's massive. And this wheel this wheel is more massive than it and balanced on top. And all the stuff they were saying about this then in 1931 is exactly the stuff they're saying now, 90 years later. Right?
Yeah.
It won't happen. I appreciate there's a certain class of people who think I should be able to fly to work and that should be fine. It's not going to happen, right? If this happens, it's not going to happen. It's just not, right? If we were doing the predictions thing for the year, I would 100% predict this wouldn't happen with the same fervency that we'll also predict that Canonical either will or won't get purchased this year.
It's funny, in this article, it says that, it says that I think it's the mayor said this. He also indirectly acknowledged that fear might be the biggest hurdle facing these challenges, facing these dreams. I actually don't know if fear is the biggest challenge. I think regulation is going to be the biggest challenge. I think it's going to take a lot for any city to allow an automated helicopter to fly around where for people who don't have any kind of pilot's license or anything like that. Even if people are scared to use this thing, that's step number one.
I'm not scared to use it. I'm scared to be standing on the street when one of these things falls out of the sky and crushes me. And more importantly, then I say, but I'm worried about that. And these people all go, oh, that's just fear talking. Like, shut up. No, it isn't. People who come up with legitimate objections to your stupid plan are not doing it out of fear. They're doing it because it's stupid. Right? It's just, I can't believe.
Although you could argue in the earlier days of flight, people were terrified of, back in the really early days when people were designed, like when aeroplanes were made out of wood and they didn't have a plane, they didn't have, there weren't passenger planes, right? Most people who were testing those planes died in the testing of them. And there was a significant amount of fear around flying. And it wasn't until Ford developed their first plane, and they transported their staff members around it, that they then started, they went on this goal of like making people not be scared of flying, because they had, I read the story about where Ford had a flight and it crashed, but everyone survived. And Ford were like, see, they're safe. Right? And I wonder whether there's going to be a certain amount of that. Like, the fear eventually will pass. I just don't know if the regulation will pass.
See, this is the thing, right? When you get on a plane, they do an absolutely psychotic amount of safety checks, and to this day, everyone who gets on a plane has to sit there while they go through and explain how to put a seatbelt on and how to take it off and everything. This does not happen when you get in your Ford pickup truck because planes are dangerous, which means that the fear is there for a legitimate reason. They put a whole bunch of stuff in place to make sure that they could mitigate that fear, sure, but also potential damage and potential risk. And none of this applies if it's just some rich bloke with a helicopter in a box like bloody James Bond. No. So I am skeptical about this, to be honest.
Do you think it will ever happen?
No.
Or do you think it's just a matter of time?
No, I do not. You don't think it will happen.
So when we're old men with beards and canes, we'll have to we should put in Google Calendar, if that even exists 40 years from now. We should put a thing saying, are planes real in our private helicopters running around in New York? We should do. Ask yourself, right? We could have had this discussion in 1931, apparently, and we could have put in Google Calendar, the flip chart edition, or whatever people did back then. One of them, a Rolodex or something, right? 90 years ago, will we be flying to work in 5 years, which people would have been promising at that point? And the answer would still be no. If anything, the world is moving away from the idea of you having to be somewhere where you'd get a plane to it anyway, at least a bit, more so than it was 20 years ago, and that's probably only going to decrease, which is an extremely deft segue into a new item, in my opinion. All right, let's hear the segue. I will judge whether it's deft or not.
Right. So the deft segue is that in January, Microsoft Teams is launching VR 3D meetings as part of Microsoft Mesh.
Really?
Yeah. And my question is, I don't want this at all. I do not want to go and meet someone in some stupid Second Life.
Not a question, by the way.
Right. So my question is, am I alone in that? Is everyone else champing at the bit to have meetings in some virtual 3D space? It very much feels like a solution desperately in search of a problem to me. There's loads of people you look at Meta going all in on the metaverse, they're just quietly backing away over the last 12 months. But this whole thing, there seems to be this utter belief that people want to have VR meetings. But I've seen no evidence of it in the real world. It's just tech demos. Is this a good idea? Would you do this? Actually, you probably would do it. You'd have done it in bloody...
yeah.
What was that 90s thing where they did VR, but it was all made out of wireframe stuff? Virtualscape or whatever it's called. You'd have done meetings in VR ML, but would normal people do this?
Well, so I have a few thoughts on this, as you might imagine.
Yes.
So, first of all, this is my take on it, is that what I want to see is presence. That's what is most important to me. I want to feel like right now, you and I are looking at each other on Zoom, right?
Oh,
and we're recording this.
Not like Christmas presents, like knowing whether
not Christmas presents, different types of presents.
Right.
And much as you and I can exchange information and we can communicate with each other, it just doesn't feel the same as when I'm sat in your flat in Birmingham, right? It's very different when we're physically in the same space.
Agreed.
And I think there's a very exciting technical problem around making people feel present with each other when they're not actually in the same room. Recently, Lex Friedman did a podcast with Mark Zuckerberg, and it was using their ultra-realistic codec avatars that they've built. And it really does. I mean, there's a little bit of uncanny valley there. You can see it, but you can see that it's pretty realistic. All the little, imperfections in people's faces, their pores and whatever else, was represented in there. And Lex Friedman, who I trust his judgment, he seems like a pretty straight up guy. He basically kept saying, I cannot believe how real this feels. It really does feel like we're sat in the same room. And they were just both on the Oculus headsets. So to me, focusing on creating an environment where people are present with each other, I think is a really valuable thing. And I think a lot of people would use it. My objection is this cartoony bullshit, right? So Meta did Horizon Worlds or whatever it was when they launched their expensive headset. And I think most people, I think you've met him, our old neighbor, Adam, who's really into VR. Yeah. I think a lot of VR, scholars will say, oh, you don't actually need photorealism. Most people don't care about that. You need to be able to see people's facial reactions. I actually don't believe that. I think the science might say that, but I think for most people to actually be in an environment, it has to look real. So to me, I don't think it's going to be 3D so much as I think it's going to be AR. I think what's going to happen is if I can sit here in my office and somehow, this is where it's going to get tricky. Somehow you could appear like a hologram in the room, like you're sat at the end of the desk with me. That I think will happen. And that I think people will use that. But seeing a cartoony version of Ack is just it's not going to swing it.
This is what the Mesh thing is. So Microsoft Mesh is a mixed reality, right? I don't know what the difference between, I do know what the difference between mixed reality and augmented reality is, but it is cartoon stuff, right? It's, you're in a Pixar film. It's not, and if you look at Pixar films, they're all amazing and everything, but it's not like it's actually real.
Yeah.
And this is, I think my basic objection to this whole concept is your thing about presence. Sure, I get that. I just don't think you're ever going to get it. I do not think that there's going to be some useful middle ground, which is not actually present. So
right.
To you, the way you're describing it is like, sure, there's us talking to one another in a little window on our screens, and it's very much mediated as that kind of experience. We're not even attempting to pretend that we're in the same place or anything. This is a telephone call which happens to have video. And then you've got, we're actually sat in the pub. And you think there's some kind of middle ground where we can fake sitting in the pub where we're actually sitting here, but it feels to both of us like we're in the pub. Whereas to me, what it feels like is saying, well, I like the experience of having a chocolate bar. Being shown a JPEG of a chocolate bar is not the same. So can we come up with some kind of middle ground between those two? And the answer is no. Any kind of thing where you pretend that I have a chocolate bar, but actually I don't, is not a useful thing, right? I don't care how photorealistic the picture of it is. I don't care whether it appears to be on my desk, but I try and bite the bloody thing. It's not there.
I think a lot of it will depend on the kind of situation. So actually, the pub is a good example where I don't think it would work. And obviously, anything involving like a physical item, like a chocolate bar, where you have to physically interact and, with haptics or eat something, wouldn't work. But I think in a work setting,
what a lot of being in the same place is. Otherwise, why would you? Why does it make a difference?
Right. But I think
you a cup of tea and you drink it.
I suspect where it will be most useful will be with certain types of experiences where you are exchanging information, or you're doing something that doesn't require physical contact. So I think meetings like Zoom meetings 100% could be done in a 3D world or in like an AR world, because we're not actually touching each other. We're sharing information, and that might be in Google Docs or Coda or Notion or whatever, and then we're communicating with each other. And then you've got the opportunity for like actually being in a physical space where people are using like, I don't know, whiteboard type stuff. I do think that would actually work, and I think to me it's very early in the journey.
Sure.
What encourages me is when you hear people like Lex Friedman, who's got no dog in this race. When I'd encourage everybody to watch this interview with Mark Zuckerberg. The interview itself is kind of interesting, but it's okay. But the first 5 minutes of it, you can tell his mind is just blown. He keeps saying like, this is the most incredible thing I've ever seen. And that I think is resonant enough that it's worth pursuing this. I don't think most people are going to sit around and like in a virtual pub, but also I actually think this is really important for people who are disabled, people who have lack of mobility, people who are living in parts of the world where it's not safe to go outside. There's a lot of like humanitarian benefits to this as well, I would say as well.
So, sure, the sci-fi film idea that we all look like we're in the same room, and to each of us it all appears we're in the same room, seems quite cool when I see it in a film. I don't know that it seems cool enough that it's worth the hysterical amount of work and effort it will take to get there. And I think there are a whole bunch of fundamental problems with it, which will mean that it's very hard to get there. And therefore, I don't think the amount of effort that will take to get there justifies the amount of work it will take to do so. Justifies the benefits of getting there.
But you could say that about.
But sure, yeah,
you could say that about anything, though.
No, I get that.
I mean, look at the cloud. Like everything runs in the cloud now. If you think about the combined amount of R&D and money that has gone into enabling an individual or a company to deploy an application onto the internet and scale up and scale down, it probably. That amount probably dwarfs the amount of money that's gone into
I don't think so.
AR and VR.
So, bear with me. I can imagine a lot of the objections that people have are things which I think are social conventions which will go away. So, imagine a world in which VR meetings become the norm, or at least normal. There'll be conventions around things like not handing someone a piece of paper anymore, which means that people will stop handing around pieces of paper in non-VR meetings. If we're all sat in the actual same conference room, it'll still be, oh yeah, I wanted you to look at this. I've punched a button and sent it to your screen, which is directly in front of you. even though you wouldn't need to, and you could just give them the damn bit of paper, because sometimes you'll have VR meetings and so on. Sure. So I think there'll be a whole bunch of social conventions which will grow up around this sort of thing that wouldn't have done before. So those things I don't see as much of a concern. It's just, I mean, I feel kind of about this the same way I feel about everyone flying around in their own private electric helicopter. That, sure, I can imagine a world in which it's happened, but I don't think the journey to get there justifies what we've got once we are there.
I mean, comparing those two, I think the VR thing actually is, or the AR thing, depending on how it lands, is actually way more important. Because
which you think is more likely?
I think the AR VR thing is way more likely.
Wow, Eric Adams, Mayor of New York, is crying his eyes out right now at your skepticism and your fear.
Yeah, well, right. The main reason is because there's no regulation standing in the way of the VR thing. And there's not like a physical safety thing that stands in the way of it.
Sure, yeah. It's not like if your VR meeting crashes that it falls out of the sky and kills 100 people standing outside Saks Fifth Avenue. Yeah,
right.
I'll give you that.
Yeah, exactly. The thing is like, I mean, I call my parents every Sunday and we talk on Facebook Messenger because it's easier for them. And if I could feel like I'm sat in the same room as them, if I could sit in my living room and the two of them in AR are positioned on my couch like they're sat there, I would spend the $3,500 on the Apple VR headset just to have that experience.
Oh, okay.
That alone.
We'll see. I mean,
because I don't get to see him, and it feels different, So
speaking of
we'll see what happens.
I'm now into my 20th great year of hearing you yammer on about VR stuff, which hasn't happened. So we'll see how it works.
Well,
you put it in your predictions in December. That could be your thing.
Well, what to me is going to be especially interesting, without turning this into the whole show about VR, is tablets were a thing. Kind of, Apple made them like a consumer item with the iPad. Same thing happened with the watch. Like, people weren't really wearing, like, nerds were wearing Android watches, but people weren't wearing, like, the average consumer was not wearing a smart watch. Apple knows how to take these new segments, push them make them consumer friendly. Now, the first Apple Vision Pro, it's so expensive. And the first version of all of these things is always too expensive.
We had this discussion. I don't think the watch would have been all that popular if there was a 3-inch cable dangling out of the back of it at all times, like there is with the headset.
Right. Yeah. But it will be very interesting to watch how this unfolds next year, because they've definitely got their work cut out for them. But Apple just have a means of making things more consumer friendly. So I think if they put it this way, I think the Apple Vision Pro is the last hurrah for VR. If that does not work, if that gets cancelled, VR is over.
Wow. Okay.
AR is over.
You heard it here, folks. You heard it here first, folks. So this is interesting. So when I said, am I alone in not wanting stupid VR 3D meetings? The answer is I'm alone in this current podcast of just the two of us. We need Jeremy for this so he can go, this is what the actual truth is, and then we listen.
Actually, you know what? We don't need Jeremy for this.
Okay, because you know he'd come down on my side in this. You know
yes,
he
this
would.
is true.
I think Jeremy would scorn your VR meetings idea so hard you'd burst into flames, and I would like to see that.
Put it this way, I can feel him right now. He's not here. I can feel him staring at me.
Yeah.
As I'm talking through this stuff.
But I'm interested. This is one of the ones where people's thoughts are interesting. So send us a comment on Mastodon or whatever, and say this is the thing. What do you think about it? Is everyone else desperate to be in 3D meetings, presumably so you could stay at home while doing it? Sounds cool. Anyway, what's next on the list, Mr. J?
So let's talk about Nikki Haley. She's currently running for to be the Republican nominee in the US. And they had the debate recently.
They did.
And I thought this was really interesting. I saw this on Reddit. If she becomes president, which is, let us be clear, unlikely at this point in the juncture.
Just a bit. Yes.
She wants social media companies. I mean, she's talking about this as legislation to, one, publish their algorithms. To my knowledge, the only company that's done this is X, formerly known as Twitter, as we always have to say. Nobody else has. Like, there's no open source published Instagram algorithm or Facebook algorithm or anything else. And she wants to ban anonymous accounts on social media. She says that this is basically, it's a security threat. She says that people should be verified on social media. So I don't want us to talk about Nikki Haley per se. I just think those policy questions is an interesting one. What do you think about that? Do you think, breaking into those two, do you think the social media companies should have to publish their algorithms? And then secondly, do you think they should ban anonymous accounts?
I think should you publish your algorithm is a fundamental misunderstanding of the issues.
Okay.
Because the only reason you want that to happen is because you think there are people who are being unfairly done over because there's a line in the code somewhere which says, if this person is a Republican, downgrade their stuff, and you want to reveal it so they stop doing it. And that's just not the case, right? And this is the thing. It's going after a boogeyman that isn't actually the problem at all. And therefore, I don't think it's a useful tech policy proposal because it's not actually a tech policy proposal at all. It's there to...
So you don't think that social media algorithms are biasing against certain types of individuals?
I do not think they are systematically doing so because someone sat down and decided it should happen. Now is keeping it secret. No.
Right. But, one, and I'm not an expert in this, but I think the Twitter files have taught us that, in fact, was happening. Like that was happening actively at Twitter. Was the algorithm was biased against certain types of people on that platform. But two, even if it's not biased against Republicans or Democrats or whatever the, topic of the day is, they certainly incentivize certain types of behavior, right? Like we knew this with Facebook, that when posts started getting more likes and more reactions, the algorithm would pump them up. And that's how people learned to kick off controversial topics because it generates more people responding so they could get views.
Sure.
So it's undeniable to me that the algorithms are doing this.
Yeah. But you're not going to get anything useful out of they're not actually going to publish the source code. They're going to publish a document which says these are the principles we go by, and these are the policies and how they work. And it will say things like our policy is to downgrade low value information and to highlight credible information. And you say, what makes something credible? And they'll go, well, we think that other credible people have voted it up, or in Twitter's case, we think that people who've paid us money have voted it up, or whatever. And this is not actually useful, right? Think of it this way, right? Someone who you don't like invites you to a party that you don't want to go to. And you say, I can't make it. And they say, why not? It's not like you have a notebook in your inside pocket with that person's name on a list that says party invites and there's a cross next to them, right?
Right.
You don't fancy going. If you're asked for a reason, you'll give a reason, but it won't be the real reason. And imagine that person then becomes president, which is about as likely as Nikki Haley managing it. And they say, I'm going to legislate to make sure that when I invite people to parties and they say no, they have to tell me why for real. Because the reason they think is because they don't like me very much, and I want them to have to say that in public. But you can't write legislation to do this. It doesn't make any sense. And this is what would it say? How can you compel someone to do this?
Let's assume for the moment.
Seriously, if someone says, why are you coming to my party? You'll say, oh, I can't make it. I'm washing my hair, or I'm busy that day, or whatever. You're not going to go, basically, I don't really like you all that much, but I don't want to say that because...
I'm not talking about that as an example. I'm talking about algorithms. I think there's no reason why you wouldn't have to publish the source code, but there's no reason why you couldn't publish the specification around how decisions get made with the algorithm. In the same way that, you have the specifications for, the ECMA define around JavaScript, or specifications for how certain file formats are implemented, like open specifications. There's no reason why the government couldn't require of social media companies they publish, okay, this is the specification around how the algorithm operates. Now, there's a whole separate question around whether they should be expected to do that. But to me, being able to publish the mechanics of how these algorithms operate, there's no reason why they couldn't do that.
Sure, but what you're going to get from everyone else if you demand that this happens is exactly the same kind of unhelpful, meaningless stuff that you've actually got from Twitter, right? They fetch the best tweets from different recommendation sources in a process called candidate sourcing, rank each tweet using a machine learning model, and then apply heuristics and filters. Sure. But I already know that that's also how Meta do things. And that's also how YouTube does things. If you said to YouTube, you have to publish your algorithm, they're going to say, we choose the videos that we think you're most likely to see by combining the output of detailed machine learning models, your previous history, people who you're marked as friends with Google's previous history. And then we rank videos in that order, and then we randomly inject some things we think you'd like to see that you don't know about into that list. We sort that list randomly, and then we put it on your front page. That's a description of their algorithm, but that's not useful. We already know that's how they did.
Well,
there's nothing
to me,
at that level. There's nothing secret or interesting in there. And as I say, the demand for this is because people who don't know what a fucking algorithm is think there's a line in there which says if poster equals Nikki Haley, score equals score minus 10, and then there's a comment underneath it going, because I hate her. And that's not how it works.
I think there is a middle ground between the zero idea of how these things work and every finite decision is mapped out and visible for everybody. If we just assume for just a moment that it's possible to document how these algorithms operate, right? Let's assume for a moment that is possible. I know you think that it's maybe not possible. You raise a very valid question around, is it useful, right? Like, yeah. What would it buy us? Now, I think to a degree, one benefit, but I don't think this is the benefit that Nikki Haley is necessarily looking for, is that, and this was illustrated by the Twitter files, is there was systematic bias in that company. It's been proven. It's been identified. There was systematic bias operating in that company. Twitter was not operating as a platform where all its citizens were, outside of hate speech and stuff like that, which obviously shouldn't exist, but like where all citizens, users of that platform were treated equally, and then the content was boosted based upon the merit of the content. There were certain things that just were that were pushed out. So that, I think there's some benefit there. But Nikki Haley's talking about national security and psychological health of people. It seems like is her primary issue. And to your point, if you publish the algorithm, I'm not sure what the benefits are, because
right, exactly.
Arguably it's going to just make it easier to game the algorithm.
Yes, precisely. So, I mean, the call for this is based on a fundamental misunderstanding of the problem, because it assumes that there are gold nuggets to be found in there. Like, so to pick an example, to talk about how, Twitter unfairness and whatever. You remember when Substack started up a thing and a rival and the Substack Notes thing started up, and suddenly links to Substack from Twitter stopped working. Yeah, I'm sure there was a line in the code, literally written in the code by a person who was told to do it, which said, if link equals substack.com, don't show the link. Right? That sort of gold nugget thing is literally there. But first of all, Twitter's we publish the algorithm didn't publish that. And secondly, again, it's not useful because, like you say, if your concern is about the psychological health of the platform as a whole, then the issue is that what gets boosted and what gets played up is stuff which makes people angry, makes people react, not stuff which makes them calm, and it's not stuff which makes them step away from the screen either. And what good is having the algorithm out there which says, yeah, we attempt to deliberately boost stuff which is going to keep people viewing the screen? You go, yeah, that's bad, but we already know they do that. If that's your problem, legislate against that, sure.
I mean, one conceivable benefit that we would have is it would mean that you could actually have an open conversation about the impact and implication of these algorithms, right? Like, one thing that's been talked about a lot is Instagram is just a really unhealthy place for young teenage girls, right? Like, there's been multiple reports of, teenage girls harming themselves and suicide because they're trying to level up to this visual appearance and aesthetic of all of these other girls on Instagram. And it's fake, it's filters, and there's also like a lot of bullying in those age groups as well. Now, it will be interesting if the Instagram algorithm, it turns out that, they tend to optimize visibility of posts based upon, let's say they're using machine learning to basically identify the content of the images and fashion related. Let's say we identify that that's basically being boosted, that kind of content. Then children's health groups and whatever else could then have a conversation in the public square about it. And to me, there's a benefit to that, right? But my worry about this is then a lot of these social media platforms will be put under such levels of scrutiny that I suspect that they would cave to consensus, and then they would actually become less useful. Now, I don't think we should be supporting teenage girls harming themselves, of course, but like, the knock-on effect of that would not necessarily be useful, which I think is interesting. So,
see, I mean,
I don't know.
Again, like all other conversations, this comes back to the issue is that they're optimizing for engagement. And if you're a social media company, you go, it's not my fault that people are engaged by this. And you go, but big picture, this stuff causes harm, and that's what regulation is.
It's a fair point. There's a reason why shitty reality TV shows are dominating TV networks, right?
Yeah.
Because people like that stuff.
Yeah.
It's garbage, but people like it.
And is it a good idea to go, well, let's just give people what they want the whole time? And the answer is probably not. And that's why things like the BBC have a charter to provide programming which is not just the most popular, but also hits a bunch of other needs. And to me, that's important. And if you're a social media company, you have no obligation to do that at all. And maybe you should have an obligation in the same way the BBC does. But that's a different discussion. And
now, before we wrap up the show as well, what do you think about the anonymous accounts thing? Like, do you think so? There's obviously been, especially within, we've talked about this previously about Elon Musk really started this trend of he was wanting to require verification, credit card verification for people on Twitter, and as a mechanism for dealing with bots. And some of the other social media networks have been talking about, like, paid plans. And I think X are experimenting in, is it New Zealand, with like, it's like $1 a year, $1 a month. It's
charging people $1. I think it's New Zealand and somewhere else. I'm not sure exactly.
Right. As a test of this. So putting the monetization of social media to one side, because we've kind of already talked about this. Do you think they should ban anonymous accounts? There's questions around like journalists.
I think
all kinds of questions.
I think banning anonymous accounts harms a whole bunch of people who you should not be trying to harm.
Right.
And does not fix the people who you want to fix. So, no, I think banning anonymous accounts is a bad idea. I get how it doesn't fix the actual problem, and it does harm a bunch of other people. I mean, I think that it harms a bunch of other people seems to be a kind of, oh, well, they're just a necessary, you can't make an omelette without breaking some eggs thing, because we need the real names policy to fix this. But I don't think the policy fixes the thing you want it to fix. And in addition, it harms a shitload of other people.
So I completely agree with you that it will harm a bunch of people where anonymity is essential for their safety, right? Journalists, certain citizens in parts of the world.
Not even essential for their safety. There's a whole, yes, I mean, absolutely. If you are an Iranian activist and you're told you have to post under your real name, it's like, fine, I'll just stop posting them, because if I post under my real name, the police will come round and hang me by my balls from the nearest lamppost.
Yes.
So I'm not going to do that. But equally, it doesn't have to be literally, if anyone knows my name, I'll get killed. It's stupid things like having a female-sounding username means you get harassed a lot more, and so people should not necessarily have to do that. Right?
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be life and death. There's a whole gradation of reasons why you might not want to post under your real name, which ought to be. There's no reason to force someone to do that, because if you push people into it, they'll just go, fine, I'm going to turn around and leave. And if that's what someone wants to do, if their vibe is, we're not interested in being the town square, we're not interested in being the place where everything happens, we're going to go, we are prepared to cut our user base to 100th of what it is now by demanding everyone sends in their credit card and their driving license, then sure, you go ahead and do that. Make yourself a tiny community of identified people. Whatever. That's what
the thing that's interesting, though. Like we say, there's no doubt that would have a negative impact on all the examples that we gave there. I can absolutely see that banning anonymous accounts having a positive impact when it comes to reducing bots and reducing large-scale scam operations. Like on X, about a couple months ago, I was just inundated with these like scammy crypto, coin things, right? And it seems to have gone away now. But I can see how it helps with that. But what I don't see, and I can see to a degree how banning anonymous accounts would help when it comes to the level of dickheadery on some of these platforms, in the same way that for years we've seen in communities that when people are anonymous, like the dickheads will hide behind an anonymous account. There are some dickheads who will use their real identity and they're just committed to being a dickhead. But I'd say a significant amount of it's behind anonymous accounts, right? And I think it will help with that. But what I don't know is to what extent. Like, I can see ways in which it would help, and like you say, you don't want the breaking the eggs, the omelet thing. Like, we don't want the Iranian citizen activist to get hung because they, Twitter gets hacked and their private details get leaked to Iranian hackers, and boom.
It's not even if Twitter gets, it's that will be public.
Well, it doesn't have to be. I mean, it could be. It could be that somebody validates. It could be that it could be that somebody validates their identity with the company, but then their public persona is anonymous. I think the point that Nikki Haley is making.
They're going to make Beyonce send in a picture of their passport, are they?
Right. I think that's what they're proposing here,
I do not believe they will do that at all. Actually.
Who would do what?
I don't think they'd make Beyonce send in a picture of her holding up her passport in front of her webcam at all.
But my point is that I think that anonymity doesn't necessarily mean there's a difference between verification and anonymity, right? I get the impression that Nikki Haley's primary desire here is verification, not anonymity. I think it's making sure that there is
no.
some kind of...
So she says every person on social media should be verified by their name. It's a national security threat. When you do that, all of a sudden people have to stand by what they say. Now, you don't have to stand by what you say if Twitter knows your name but no one else does. She's not talking about verification to the company that you're posting on. She's talking about getting rid of anonymity in the public space, right? And such a move would lead to an increase in civility, Haley believes. When they know their pastor, their family members can see it, it's going to help our kids and it's going to help our country. She's not talking about you proving your identity to Twitter. She's talking about you have to stand by to everybody, which is a bloody disastrous. not only is it a disastrous idea, I don't think it will fix things. And more importantly, I don't get why this is the president's damn problem.
Well, I mean, I think it's fair to say that social media is so prevalent in society and there are so many negative consequences of it. I think it is their responsibility to have policy around it.
To do something which will fix it, yes, but requiring everyone to post under their real name and fundamentally endanger the safety of loads of people is not.
Is that the right solution? So Here you go, folks. This is a good opportunity to let us know what you think. First of all, let us know whether we should permanently kick Jeremy off the show, because clearly, we can get by without him, and he brings zero value.
I don't want to disappoint you, dude, but I feel like this is not a door you necessarily want to open, because we're now going to get a load of emails going, no, absolutely keep Jeremy, but kick Jono and Stuart off the show. Just have it be the Jeremy show, and that might happen.
Just the Jeremy show. We don't want that. We don't want that. But let us know what you think about we've talked about flying autonomous helicopters and VR meetings and social media. Let us know what you think, and we'll. And thank you to Marius as always.
There are a couple of other things I want to very, very briefly mention. The first one is thank you very much to Marius. Go to nerdzoom.media for all your audio editing needs, because he's brilliant. And the second one is that a whole bunch of people have come to me over the last few months and said, hey, the website's down a lot, isn't it? And we are aware, including friend of the show, Adam Sweet, who sent us a very nice email. He didn't. He sent us a very abusive email. But he was correct. We are aware of this, and moves are going on to fix this problem, and hooray, yes. So keep your eye out.
We'll be fixed in the next couple of weeks.
We are on it, we know. So yes, thank you.
Lovely. Alrighty.
Okay.
Peace out, everyone.
Cheers all.